Hey everyone. Hey, what a great day this has been. Thank you all for joining us. We're running just a little bit behind schedule. Sorry about that for everyone. We're going to quickly move into our keynote speaker of this event. This is going to be Dr. Takata Rooks, who's going to be giving us, a really moving presentation to kind of finalize our program here today. We'll have one more music set after that. But before we do that, I just really want to quickly bring in some of the organizers who helped bring this event today. And I also wanted to draw attention to the Nikkei Student Union. Thank you, the Nikkei Student Union, and the other student organizations at UC Davis and beyond who put that nice video together. I want to check in with Lisa, who has been moderating the Discord discussion. Lisa, do you want to tell us about what's going on over there?
Hi, yeah, thank you. I hope everybody's enjoying the event so far. Yeah, I wanted to, and thank you for the student organizations for putting that wonderful video together. Um, yeah, I've been seeing a lot of great comments all throughout, YouTube, Zoom, and Discord. I'd like to thank the Nikkei Student Union and the Intercollegiate Nikkei Council for their support in this event by organizing this watch party on Discord. So again, one of the most meaningful parts of organizing this festival is connecting with the community. And now that location is not a limitation, I would love to use this opportunity for us to really connect during this time. So if you're not already part of the Discord channel, I would love for you to be able to meet the other viewers and to have some discussions there. And I believe some of the featured artists will be there during the last music set. So I don't want you to miss out on that opportunity to chat with them. So we'll put the link again in the chat. So make sure you head on over there if you're interested in doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And also just a quick thank you to the other hosts we have on screen. Ashley Shen, Candice Nguyen are both been hosting from here at the Shrem Museum of Art and from home. Katie has been running production for us all day long. Thank you so much, Katie. And without further ado, I want to turn to Dr. Curtis Takata Rooks. I'll give you a brief intro, Dr. Rooks, and then I'll let you take it from here. So for everyone who's joining us, Curtis Takata Rooks, he's coming to us from Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, where he is an assistant professor of Asian Pacific American Studies. He received his bachelor's degree in economics and Asian studies from Dartmouth, a master's in public policy analysis from Trinity College at Hartford, and a PhD in comparative culture from the University of California, Irvine. Dr. Rooks is an expert in critical mixed race theory, and his works brings to light experiences that intersect and transcend simple racial categorization. With his background, his policy background too, and he also he looks at ways in which interdisciplinary studies remain relevant in academia, industry, health equity, and more. And we're just so honored that you could be our keynote speaker today, Dr. Rooks. I'll give it to you.
Okay, well, hello everyone, and I'm really excited to be here. I want to thank the Davis Cherry Blossom organizers, Greg, Candice, Ashley, Katie, Lisa, in particular. I also want to acknowledge my ability to do this, to give honor to my parents, Curtis and Kikuyo Rooks, to my brother Tommy, my wife Miki, my daughter Mariko, to my students at LMU, and I know at least one is on this particular webinar, and that's Jenica Rose Garcia, that they provide me the energy and desire to keep doing what I do. Today, I'm going to focus most of my comments on the Japanese American community, but it can certainly be broadened out to the entire Asian American community. But I figure if I'm going to spank anyone, I should probably spank my own family first. So let me begin. I'd like to begin my remarks with an excerpt from the novel Southland by Nina Rivera, a woman of mixed race Japanese ancestry. This novel was set in what was then known as the Angeles Mesa and is now the Crenshaw District or South Los Angeles. I use this particular excerpt because shared peoplehood begins with shared place. And to be sure, the Angeles Mesa, Crenshaw, Culver City, Venice corridor that runs along Adams, Jefferson, Rodeo, now Obama Boulevard, to Culver City, Washington, and Venice Boulevards was and is a special place. For those of you who are on this webinar who may be from LA or from this neighborhood, you know that this is a special corridor. And for those of us whose memories are peppered with stories, I want to ask you to all close your eyes for a moment and see the scene unfold. A few of them after living someplace else for a year or several, after starting out in Little Tokyo or South Central, or following the crops around the state, bought a plot of land in Angeles Mesa. The price was good, and what you got for it? Rich land nestled by wild hills. And if their neighbors spoke a different language, wore different color skin, here and only here, it didn't matter. Whatever feelings or apprehensions people had when they came, they learned to put them aside because their children played together, sat beside each other at the 52nd Street School, and because it was impossible to walk through the neighborhood without seeing someone different than you. Now, if a visitor had come through in 1958, he or she might have closed their eyes and listened to the voices around them, thought they'd taken a wrong turn and ended up in Texas. They might have walked into Harry's Noodle Shop and mistaken the town for Little Tokyo. They might see a group of men just released from the Goodyear plant, crowded around a radio and listening to a ball game. They'd be sitting on milk crates in front of a market owned by a young Japanese man, a veteran, who'd worked there since he was a teenager, who hired local boys of all backgrounds, who heard so many of his customers' stories he could almost forget his own. The people who lived there, the people who laughed and drank and listened to the Dodgers, they didn't know they were unusual. They didn't know that their disregard for the rules observed outside the Mesa made them exceptions. And yet, their experiment did not stand. Now, Revere's novel, you can open your eyes, Revere's novel about place, community, and peoplehood, particularly Japanese and African-American communities, center around three major stories. And so I can share this without sort of giving the novel away. One, it is a love story between a Japanese-American young man and a young African-American woman. It is a murder mystery story. And it is a story of self-discovery by a Sansei as she uncovers her grandfather's hidden past, her family's hidden past, and in doing so, her hidden past, forcing her to reimagine herself, to reconceptualize herself, and reconnect with whom she shares peoplehood. So what are the stories we tell ourselves? Now, as a professor, I start each class with a simple question. How do you know what you know? Now, this gets met with a few puzzled looks and quick calculations by students attempting to figure out the right answer to this epistemological question, followed by furrowed foreheads wondering, what does the professor want me to say? And still others thinking, this has got to be a trick question. Well, after several moments of awkward silence, the discussion breathes life as students popcorn out responses that I dutifully record on the whiteboard. Friends, family, church or faith teachings, fairy tales, school, science, TV, movies, media, print, visual, and social media especially, experimentation, and experience. Well, as you can see, this simple question unlocks complex processes of knowing and the ways in which knowledge and its narratives are communicated. So I asked you, the audience, rhetorically, how do you know what you know? And what are your sources of knowing? Then as a critical race professor, it leads me to ask my students the next set of questions. What does it mean to be, and I ask them to fill in the blank with their racialized identity. I follow that with, how do you know that you are, whatever you filled in the previous blank? Followed by a third question. How do you know that others are not, whatever you filled in the previous blank? So, what are the stories we tell ourselves, and where do they come from? Stories are a powerful way in which we come to know what we know about ourselves and our relationships to the worlds around us, to those who inhabit those worlds. These stories often shape and frame, regulated as it were, those with whom we find kinship, what we value, what we find aesthetically pleasing, what we find sacred, as well as what we find less valuable, what we dislike, and what we find profane. Stories shape what we cheer, what we boo, what we ignore. For our purposes today, along with the many sessions of this festival, the passage from Southland that I led off with, stories tell us about our families, legends of our families' past accomplishments, along with cautionary tales of the shameful moments we are warned not to repeat, the mistakes we are warned not to make. Our family stories tell us how it is we belong to the family and who comprises our family members in all their glory and with their stumbles, tells us with whom we are kin. And yet, within those tales of family deeds and misdeeds, there are also secrets. The stories left untold, hidden, silenced. For the Japanese American communities, particularly on the West Coast, we know all too well the cost of silence. As Janice Mirikitani reminded us, they said that silence was better, golden like our skin, quieter like don't make waves, expedient like horse stalls and deserts. While the redress and reparations movement sought to kill this silence, to tell the untold hidden stories that lives in our bodies, infecting us with intergenerational trauma that we continue to unwind. And perhaps it was that silence, born of feared judgments and wrongful incarceration, that contributed to the other silences of our past, leading to the silences of our present, threatening our future. In 1966, Time magazine ran a story entitled "Success Story, the Japanese American Style," coining the term model minority, creating a mythical tale of Japanese American exceptionalism and white adjacency. And so I ask again, what does it mean to be Japanese American? And how do we know we are Japanese American? What have been the stories told about us? The stories we tell ourselves? And what's left out in that telling? In many households and among our Japanese American community leaders at that time in 1966, we became complicit in the telling of this model story about us. And in our self-telling, transformed this myth from a story about us into a story of us. And even as the activist youth of that generation tried to push back on that mythical narrative, unfortunately, it had already woven itself into the fabric of our family and community quilts. Perhaps having experienced the collective shame from the stories told about us during and in post-World War II, it pushed us to readily accept, to cling to this new story of praise and exceptionalist being that was being told about us. Perhaps it was the validation that the silence, Shigata Ganai, had brought us, complexly intertwined with gaman, the notion of persistence, and gambaru, hard work, that allowed us to survive and resist the hegemony, bigotry, and incarceration of American white supremacy and nationalism. Perhaps it was the arrogance of inherited Japanese culture and its tale of superiority that craved recognition. Perhaps it was the anger of the Watts riot or rebellion and the lost property and disrupted sense of security and safety. To be sure, it was probably a complex combination of all of these at once and many more perhapses that allowed for the acceptance and embracing of this mythical story about us, the model that was used to tell another falsehood, redeeming America and its systemic and structural racism, granting us white adjacency while driving, as scholar Ronald Takaki would say, wedges between us and our then neighbors. But at what cost? In what ways did silence the telling of our stories, of our neighborhoods, of our collaborations, our partnerships, our friendships, our peoplehood, and yes, even our kinship with our BIPOC neighbors? This mythology of the model minority, built on the stilts of economic, occupational, educational, and social success, fails to tell the full story of the bedrock on which these stilts are embedded. Blackness and how to deal with Blackness is an ongoing story of America, and the pendulum of fairness, of being created equal, that permeates America laid the foundation for Asian American, thus Japanese American, rights in the United States. The 14th Amendment to the US Constitution established a means to give citizenship to the newly freed, formerly enslaved African Americans. And along with it, in this particular amendment, the legal principles of due process and equal protections created pathways to Japanese American settlement in the United States. For example, the right of birth citizenship ensured that Japanese American immigrant families, through their children, could rightfully claim as their country, US as their country, using their children's citizenship as a means to circumvent alien land laws. And though the incarceration stole most of the capital created by the Japanese American community before the war, it provided the template for recovery as we attempted to rebuild what had been lost. But what I want you to think about today is, had it not been for the 14th Amendment, how different the story would have been for these aliens ineligible for citizenship. Similarly, the Civil Rights Movement, which is more than just protests, marches, and speeches, well, because it involved intense negotiations, not only on the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and the 1965 Immigration Act, but not only on that legislation, but it was also the intense negotiations on how to operationalize them, including but not limited to Bernard Rustin's advocacy on the part of labor in the establishment of affirmative action. Affirmative action to remedy past discrimination and ensuring diversity in the workplace became an important pathway for Japanese Americans because the model minority, as the model group along with other Asians, they were allowed into white systems to circumvent the spirit and intent, rectifying Black discrimination while meeting the letter of the law. Japanese Americans became the model and palatable new neighbors for diversity in white suburban housing developments. Again, providing the patina of progressiveness, resulting in non-redline housing, allowing for the accumulation of wealth, providing their children access to better schools, hence improved college admissions and later professional schools, and with it the potentials for wealth accumulation. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that every Japanese American who studied hard, who worked hard, who saved and invested in a home did not do the hard work to succeed. But what I am saying, and this is a story that isn't told, that in large part, the opportunity for that success was bought part and parcel from a deep anti-Blackness within our society writ large. And in the telling of the story of ourselves, we rarely, if ever, recognize that our use as a wedge against Blackness by systemic anti-Black racism gave us the chance to use our cultural toolkits of Gaman and Gambaru to build back better. By not including and incorporating the stories of the Black community's fight for civil and human rights into our stories, we distance ourselves from ourselves, choosing silence over voice. So going forward, what will be the stories we tell ourselves? As scholar Gary Okihiro states, and I paraphrase here, we are a kindred people, African and Asian, Japanese American. We share a history of migration, cultural interaction, and trade. We share a history of colonization, or the threat of colonization, oppression and exploitation, and parallel and mutual struggles for freedom. We are a kindred people, forged in the fire of white supremacy and tempered in the water of resistance. Yet that kinship has been obscured from our range of vision, and that our stories of common cause silenced, turned into narratives of competition for access and resources. Going forward, what will be the stories we tell ourselves? Will we look back and acknowledge that within our very first immigrant communities, there were Japanese Black families that played central roles in the pioneer ethnic community and economy? For example, will we include a story, one not far from Davis, from Sacramento, of Masumizu Kuninosuke, who married in 1869, married an African-American woman and had 3 daughters and a son, operating a fish store in Sacramento for many years? Will we tell the story of the children of military Black and Japanese international families who migrated during and after US occupation of Japan, whose work in multiracial identity has provided the mixed ancestry Yonsei, Gosei, and others marginalized within the community, the theories and language to voice their identity? Will we loudly tell the stories of the Yuri Kuchiyamas and the Haseya Yamamotos and other activists who sought and found kinship in the Black and brown communities, playing instrumental roles in striving for equality and voice? Will we elevate the Ronald Dellums to the level of the Alan Simpsons when we tell the story of redress and reparations? What will be the stories we tell ourselves? We tell our children. This Cherry Blossom Festival today has been a good step in reclaiming our kinship and expanding our story as we seek to turn our passion into purpose, as we seek to return to our mesas and kill this silence. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that inspirational talk, Dr. Rooks. We have some time for some questions and answers from our audience, if anyone would like to post there now. Otherwise, just want to thank you again for being part of our festival and in sharing these stories and reclaiming our shared identities. Yeah. How have you been holding up, Dr. Rooks?
Doing pretty well. It's tiring, you know, with the stay at home, the COVID, and teaching is actually harder on Zoom than it is face to face. But the other thing that I've been able to do is really spend time in various community venues talking about sort of this notion of shared kinship and shared peoplehood. Mm-hmm. And, you know, for me, it's with this particular issue of Black Lives Matter, you know, I can't divorce it. It is in my body. That is me. I am Black. I am Japanese. I'm Japanese. I'm Black. Right?
Yeah.
And so, and it impacts my family because with all that goes on, my wife, who's Sansei, she has to worry when I leave the house. You know, my daughter, who is also part Black, challenges the places that she's in about sort of the issues that you guys have raised today, as well as worried about me coming home, right?
Yeah.
So I think what's always interesting, because I do a lot of work in the Japanese American community, and I would say that most people in the Japanese American community pretty much see me as Japanese American to a degree, right? So a few years ago, I was doing a general thing on diversity training for the United Methodist Church, and I focused on sort of particularly Black and brown issues within that. And a woman from the Japanese American community who had seen me mostly in those spaces came up, and she was sort of shocked that I was talking about the way in which I was talking about diversity at that point. And I had to say to her, I'm never not Black.
Yeah.
Because America doesn't give me that opportunity, right? And that's okay, because there's a richness there, right? So, I asked that story, the third question I ask is, how do you know those who are not you?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And often at times I think when people think about the Black community who are not a part of the Black community, they think about culture, music, athleticism. I mean, just lay out the positive stereotypes or the negative stereotypes and the victimization, right?
Yeah.
But what, as Gary Okihiro was saying, if we really investigate, or what I've said before, if we really investigate, we both share this abiding belief in family, this abiding belief in our people groups, abiding belief in wisdom and education. I mean, Black people wanted education so badly, they had to make it illegal for them to learn it, and they beat and killed people for trying to learn or trying to teach them, right? But the stereotype is we don't appreciate education. That's not to say there aren't antipathies, that there aren't challenges in the Black community around education and other things. But when you've been denied an opportunity for education for over 400 years, and you've been given the worst opportunities, I think it's hard for a 6-year-old to say, they want me to learn.
Yeah.
Right? So understanding those things, right? But yet, in the community itself, wisdom is valued, learning is valued, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's so much that gets ignored when we only look at headlines.
Yeah. And
stories, and that came through. That's come through a lot in the past 6 months, right? It's mostly about our victimhood, not about sort of the richness of our resistance, the richness of our persistence, the richness of our, right?
Yeah.
Belief in America.
So I guess a lot of the people who are watching this today, thank you for joining us from other institutions, from UC Davis as well. A lot of young people who are looking to tell better stories about ourselves too. And I don't want to just make you answer the same question you said before, but what are some of the little steps you see people doing, or ways that we can maybe take your message to heart as we try to organize ourselves?
Well, I certainly think that you need to push yourself to learn your own family stories.
Yeah.
Right. The novel I used is a tremendous one. I mean, it's fiction, but it really talks about, right? There's probably more to the connection your family has, particularly if you've been here more than 3 generations, with other communities of color. Just is, right?
Yeah, it has to be.
It behooves us in teaching our new generations, the new immigrant communities that come in, that says, like I said, the right that your children have a right of birth citizenship, right?
Yeah,
was built on giving Blacks the right to birth citizenship. It's how we brought them into the country, right? Now, we haven't always lived up to that as a country, but that basic right is there. The notion of due process, the notion of equal protections under the law, right? Those were all built around granting rights to Black people. The 15th Amendment that gave us the right to vote. I mean, it didn't give women the right to vote, but it gave somebody other than white people the right to vote, that you couldn't be denied vote because of race or religion or any of those other things. Unfortunately, it didn't say gender, and we rectified that with the 19th, right? Those things that even the 1965 Immigration Act was a larger part of the civil rights movement that said, you know, because we were in the middle of the Cold War. And so we were fighting with the world about whether or not our democracy was real. And the Soviet Union was saying to other countries of color, saying, why would you want to go to America? Look what they've done to your people in America, right?
Yeah.
And so part of the changing of the Immigration Act had to do with this larger piece that was going on, right? Mm-hmm. Which allowed immigration from Asia again, which had been cut off virtually since 1924, mm-hmm. right?
Yeah.
So it's about, because I'm talking to college students, I'm going to call on you and university students, or I'd rather say young scholars, because students learn for a test, scholars learn to learn, right? To use that for something other than that. So to own it so that they understand themselves. Do what you do, read, right? I love the young man, the Filipino-American artist, and his things.
Uriah, yeah.
He was dropping citations and things that educate yourself, right? Educate yourself. Don't rely on your professors to educate you. Right?
Yeah.
Because there's professors out there who are invested in the lie, are invested in science, right? There are some professors who aren't. Find those professors, or find the students of those professors, young scholars of those professors, trade syllabi, trade conversations. Don't be afraid to have those conversations.
Thank you. I want to get to a couple of more people writing some questions in the Q&A. We have Izumi Sakamoto asks, do you think that more JAs are challenging the silence and seeking the shared kinship with other BIPOC folks? And do you think that increasingly mixed heritage that Yonsei and Gosei JA people have is challenging that complacency? She also asks, how can we change community narratives to expand that shared kinship and kill the silence?
Right. So one is going back to the history. That's the easy part.
Yeah.
I think what's going on in the contemporary is we really have to sort of know that when we walk into someone else's space, right, that it's their space. We've sort of inherited, and our white adjacency has given us an arrogance that allows us to think we're going to go save somebody.
Yeah.
Right? So first we got to lose that. We ain't saving nobody. Right? Now, we may be able to bring resources and other things that aren't there, but it's for them to use and engage in and partnership with you in meeting or sort of challenging the things that those resources aren't allowing them to have. But we have to sort of really take a good look at ourselves to say, understand why we're doing it. And then as we do it, right, to do it in partnership, right, which means we might have to check ourselves, right? And say, how can I help? Not here's how I'm going to help you. Right?
Thank you.
For example, with the the incarceration of immigrant children and things like that, right? We need to really learn the histories of the countries that they're coming from. Right? We can't just go and lick the icing off the top of the cake. We have to get down into the ingredients.
Thank you. I think I lost it, but we had a question about decolonizing our as young scholars, and not just students. And I think there's been a lot of talk in some departments about decolonizing kind of the narratives we use in education itself. Do you have any thoughts on that for students?
Well, certainly in this emotional moment, a lot of universities are talking that. We'll see if they walk the talk. But what we do see clearly is that young faculty of color in particular are carrying the burden of labor on this in large part, as well as some of our accomplices, usually young women faculty. I think as students, the way that you support it and can work on it is take the classes. I know you want to be a mechanical engineer, but take an ethnic studies class. Take more than one ethnic studies class, right? Don't be afraid to take one outside of your group, but take some in your group too. whether you do it through art or literature, through something, but don't just be a bystander of critical race, right? Engage in those courses, because that will tell, you know, if, and then do these sort of organizing. Each one bring one.
Interesting. Yeah.
Right. Each one bring one. Don't you just come. You grab your friend, your suite mate, the person across the hall, right? And bring other bodies, people that you know who think it's stupid or silly or whatever, or they don't have time for it. Bring them to those courses. I mean, there's a practical thing. If you have enrollments, then those enrollments are hardy, then the university will actually keep offering the courses. Right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because if there's no enrollment, the classes are going to go away. So they aren't, you know, they'll pay fire insurance for a while, but not forever.
So everyone listening at home, I hope you take that to heart, where, you know, let's take some more classes. Let's, I think we have actually, Jeremiah, Uriah, the artist you mentioned, is in our chat saying, let's push for more ethnic studies participation. Let's organize, let's do this.
And then organize things where you can tell your voice. I love spoken word. I wish I could do it, but I love spoken word, right?
Yeah.
Do those things where your voice comes out. Get, you know, all those different things. Write stories for children, right? Figure out what your gift is and employ it. And employ it on your campuses.
Yeah, it's a similar theme, actually, you know, tying back to our first panel on Tycho, our activists who joined us this morning, saying, you know, do what you love and make the world better with it. So I think that's a really nice way to end it on. We are so honored that you could join us for this keynote speak, Dr. Rooks. Thank you so much for joining us here at our festival.
Well, I am truly honored to be able to share this day with you. And for those of you who are out there in the audience, I'll just leave you with, let's see if I can get it right. Let's bring Wakanda to America.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Dr. Rooks. All right, we're gonna have one more artist set, everybody. So stick around if you're hanging out with us. Before we do that, though, I'm gonna get all these artists on a call. We're gonna have a little kind of discussion about being a performing artist during this time. We're gonna queue up a quick video, though, we have a special presentation from one of our friends on campus, Nakekini Hawaii, our Polynesian, Hawaiian, Tahitian dance group. So let's have that first.